Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IRSM branch seminar, webinar, I should say, with the with the focus on men's mental health. Before I introduce the speaker for tonight, just a few updates for everybody here in the KSA IRSM. Our current KSA membership is running at 312. Our LinkedIn following is 336, and currently on WhatsApp, I think we have 118 or 119. We can update those figures as well after the next branch meeting as well. We have a couple of webinars planned over the next 6 months or so, and myself and Julie have been talking and discussing this. And we'd very much like your input into these webinars as well, ladies and gentlemen. So today we have the men's mental health. In July, we are going to have a webinar about environmental, focusing on recycling. In August, we hope to have an Arabic presentation. So any of our Saudi brothers and sisters that are interested in presenting a webinar, please feel free to contact me. And then in September, we're hoping to do a fire safety webinar as well. And we will have a schedule for the rest of the year after that. And if you have any webinars that you'd like to present or to be presented, please feel free to contact us through the WhatsApp group or the online as well. The KSA at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, we've been maybe a little bit quiet on our WhatsApp group. So I hope that we can just inject some more energy back into it and get your input and get your ideas. Lots of things happening here in the KSA, as you know. Lots of new projects happening, lots of changes with the weather and with the summer restrictions now on us. So there's a lot of changes in the hours. And this is one of the reasons why we decided to go with this webinar tonight, because these hours can have a big influence on our lives and on our mental health and on our relationships as well with our families, because maybe we're not in the same sort of contact. Our meeting, as we agreed, as I agreed with Julie there last week, our branch meeting is going to happen, is going to start again, and we are looking for some new committee members as well, ladies and gentlemen. Again, if you're interested, please feel free to contact us. Okay, I think that's enough of an update for the moment. I'm looking forward to the webinar now, and I'll hand you over to Miss Jo Caruso, who is an expert in this area. So over to you, Jo. We're looking forward to the webinar. Thank you.
Jo, you're on mute at the moment. Hello, Jo. Just bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. We'll just see if we can find out what the problem is.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I think what happened, Julie, was I think I have to ask for your permission to be unmuted. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you to Daryl and Julie for inviting me today to come along and give you a brief overview on men's mental health. My name is Jo Caruso. Could I have the next slide, please, Julie? And my business and company is called Working With You in Mind. And my background's actually been in mental health for, well, for 30 years, and I've worked in lots of different clinical areas, supporting people who have mental health problems and their families to live the best quality of life they possibly can. Working with you in mind, we provide mental health awareness and coaching directly into the workplace. So I'm the lead in the company, and I also work with 4 mental health research assistants. Could I have the next slide, please, Julie? And we've been looking at men's mental health from a podcast that I host called Let Men Talk, which is available on Spotify and Apple. And it's a series of podcasts that give men the space to share about their experiences with their emotional and mental health, and for some people mental illness, but also their story of recovery and overcoming something that's been very difficult and challenging in their lives. So, you know, please do feel free to take a listen to some of those podcasts. There's some great guests. I've been very, very lucky to have some, you know, great sporting guests, great leaders on there as well, that names you might be familiar with if you're into rugby or powerlifting or football. There's a few names on there that you may recognize, but each of the men will come, they openly shared about the challenges that they have faced being a man in the world today. Next slide, please, Julie. So there's some of the guests from the podcast. You may recognize some, you may not. There's some very good leaders on there as well. So if you've got any people in leadership on the webinar, it's always good to hear how lonely it can be and how what they've found helpful to help with their mental health in a challenging time. And this was all started during the pandemic, really for me to find out what it is around men's mental health and how we can help support men feel safe to share some of their life experiences. Thank you, Julie. So I've called this Men and Mental Health and Connecting the Dots, what you need to know and what you can do. So there will be an opportunity for some questions at the end, but if you have any immediate questions, and I'm also happy to take questions out of the webinar as well. So I'm going to start with some statistics. Sorry, next slide, please, Julie, just to give you an overview of some of the statistics around men's mental health worldwide. So worldwide, 1 in 4 adults is affected by a mental or neurological disorder, such as depression, anxiety. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's when someone's been involved in a trauma at some point in their life, whether it's been in their childhood or whether it's been in their adolescence or into adult years, but that they've not been able to process that trauma effectively, and that what happens there is that they often have flashbacks from the event, or it comes out in an emotional or a behavioural way. Every 40 seconds, 1 person dies by suicide with depression being the leading cause. And I guess as we go through the presentation, there may be some things that are quite difficult to hear or to listen to, but I will always say, if there's going to be something that I feel you should know, we're going to talk about suicide or an area that may feel uncomfortable, I will always give you a warning. Then you've got a choice whether you want to listen or whether you just want to turn off for a few minutes and come back and join us. Next slide, please, Julie. It's estimated that depression and anxiety, so this is globally, could cost the economy up to $1 trillion US. So that's a huge amount of money in the workplace particularly, and that is with people that are, you know, not able to work due to depression and anxiety, and perhaps not getting the help that they can have because of accessibility. The services aren't available. It may be that they are themselves unaware that they need help, but also that they're just not ready to accept the support. So what happens a lot of the time is that, you know, particularly with anxiety and depression, we're not able to be aware ourselves that perhaps we're struggling. Now, I don't talk about signs and symptoms in this webinar purely because we don't have the time allocated, but there are many different signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, which would be different for all of us, because nobody experiences a mental health problem in the same way as the next person. So if you take one thing away from this webinar today, it's that our mental health is unique to all of us. And actually, we all have mental health. Each and every person on the planet has mental health. What we don't all have and what we don't all want to experience in our lifetime is mental ill health. So I think that's also worth bearing in mind. So which is why I tend to stay away from things around diagnoses, because actually they're not often helpful. But what is really, really helpful, and we'll come on to it a little bit later, is watching our behaviour patterns and behaviour changes in your family and in your friends and in your work colleagues. But I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. Mental health disorders cost, so the UK economy now, 118 billion each year. Again, it's an astronomical amount of money. And you know, you might want to have a think and maybe ask a question around that later on of why that is. So men aged, sorry Julie, if you have the next slide, thank you. So men aged 40 to 49, here I'm just going to talk about suicide again, have the highest risk of rates of suicide in the UK. And yet they report the low levels of life satisfaction compared to women in the UK. So maybe have a think about why that might be. So men aged 40 to 49, what's happening for men in that age group? You know, there's perhaps some major life changes, perhaps they feel they're not where they expected to be at that time in their life, perhaps they've experienced some or multiple losses, and that could be a breakdown of a relationship, a marriage, perhaps they've lost a parent, but it can be loss usually does contribute to high rates of suicide. And this low level of life satisfaction, perhaps think about why men in that age group would report low levels of life satisfaction compared to females, where we report that actually in that age group that our quality of life is actually very good. So men are less likely to recognise and report physical and mental health issues, therefore find it very hard to acknowledge the need for support. So what this kind of is alluding to is that even when a man has a physical health problem, so they know that they have something wrong with them physically, perhaps it's a few aches and pains, perhaps they're noticing perhaps some lumps and some things that are unusual on their bodies physically, they still don't feel it's as important as what a female would to go to the GP to get that checked out. So they know it's there, but tend to kind of push on through with the way things are in life, and perhaps hopefully that physical problem may go away. I know somebody who has terrible hip pain, and it's through injury from playing sport, but they have never ever been to their doctor to see if they could, you know, be put forward for a hip replacement. And it's something that they could free themselves of that pain and discomfort if only they would, you know, make that decision to go to a GP and have a conversation. So have a think, what might be behind somebody not going to have a conversation with their general practitioner. And then when it comes to mental health issues, again, this is of a similar vein, that perhaps they're at a point where, you know, things are very stressful in life. They feel that they've been having some emotional challenges and therefore have not been talking with anybody about how they feel. And often it's the acknowledgement that they do need support, but they perhaps don't know what support is available, what's out there. You know, it's quite frightening, isn't it, if you're going to ask for support but you don't know what it looks like, or you actually in yourself, you actually don't know what support you need. So there's a lot of myths and a lot of stigma still around mental health, and particularly around men sharing, even though we are getting better. And there's definitely much more support available for men, lots of different groups out there now that are available for men to access online as well. If you're not able to go there face to face, that will offer support and are really helpful. There's lots of good supportive networks available, which is new, I'd say, from the last maybe 5 years onwards, and particularly a lot have come to fruition during the pandemic as well. Next slide, please, Julie. So men are less likely to access psychological therapies such as counselling. CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy, so that works on the way that we think and view what is going on in our world. So it's usually a shorter form of therapy, but can be very, very effective. And other talking therapies, so there are many types of talking therapies. So what that's saying there is that as women, we tend to feel more comfortable in finding ourselves a counsellor or a therapist or someone to talk to. And again, it goes back to not knowing what it's going to be like. Men are nearly 3 times more likely to become dependent on alcohol, other drugs, gambling and pornography, which would lead to some form of addictions. So that's an unhealthy coping mechanism, and what we want to try and encourage men to do is have more healthier coping mechanisms. And it's not about not drinking or maybe just having a social drink, but it's about acknowledging if any of those things there on the slide are becoming a problem and you actually can't do without them. And again, you will know that in yourselves when that begins to form a problem. Thank you, Julie. So just a pause for reflection here, and you might want to write some thoughts down, and we can discuss this at the end. So why do you think men have the highest rates of suicide? Because that 40 to 49 age group is where the statistics, particularly in the UK, are saying it's the highest. But also since the pandemic, the younger age group, the younger men as well, from I'd say 15 up to early 20s, particularly in the UK, the figures are increasing day by day. And just for some information really about our brain, actually, which is quite helpful, is that our brains on both males and females don't fully form until we're 25 years old. So by the time we get to 25, I don't know how old all of you are on the webinar today, but if you're older than 25, then your brain is now fully formed. So you will know that sometimes change becomes much harder as you get older. So if pre-25 you've got some really good healthy habits, which is why education around mental health and well-being for that younger age group, even starting way back in primary school, kind of really helping children to acknowledge their feelings and talk about their feelings, that's going to lead into adult life with a very different perspective if you haven't had that opportunity to talk about how you feel when you were younger, to even begin to understand and process perhaps some of the things that you've gone through. So just have a little think about that on that reflection. Why do you think men have the highest rates of suicide? Thank you, Julie. The prevalence of mental health issues in men has been triggered by the unique challenges which are faced by men. So we're all unique in the world, but men particularly have a different set of challenges. And I did a podcast with a professor of mental health from South Bank University, and one of the things that he highlighted and alluded to is that right now, in our current climate, it's very risky for men to be a man. And by what he was saying is about some of the challenges that you as men face, in the world today, particularly with a lot of talk around, you know, toxic masculinity, you know, particularly around men in leadership finding more empathy and compassion. So there's lots of different challenges that people face. So we've been doing some data, we've been doing some research on the podcast. So I'm just going to share some of the findings. You're the first to hear this, by the way, that we've discovered some of the common themes that the men have been talking about in our podcast recordings. So, societal, sorry, Julie. Thank you. Society's expectations and gender stereotypes. So this is steeped in what they believed that the role of the male was, and what they viewed that other people's perception of their role was. That men are expected to be emotionally resilient, inexpressive, whilst women usually adopt a nurturing and expressive behaviours. So you might want to have a think about, do you agree with that? Don't you agree with that? Is that something you've perhaps experienced? And in your kind of life, and how do you feel about that? Thank you, Julie. Next slide. So here's some quotes from some of the guests. There's a lot of pressure on being this alpha person who does not fail and who succeeds in everything they do. Accepting failure should be something normal for men. And that's by, I think, an ex-professional footballer called Daniel Reeves. And he's a very, very good athlete now. So for him, what he was talking about was that fear of failing and the pressure on him to succeed in everything that he does. So that might be familiar to some people on the webinar. It may not. And I guess the other thing, I know that there's some females on this webinar today. You know, what we're trying to do is also help women understand that men do think differently, see some of the challenges that faces. So ultimately, you can have better relationships with each other. And, you know, a lot of our mental health, when our relationships are good, our mental health is better. So that's just something to for females to consider as well. Thanks, Julie. So in this society, men are often told to suck it up and to be a man. And there's another phrase that gets used, which is man up, which is very derogatory, I think, to men. So about dealing with certain situations. And I think in a lot of cases, those words force men not to share their feelings. So that's a really good question, isn't it, to think about. Do those things like suck it up, be a man, man up, actually suppress men more into not sharing those feelings? So it'd be interesting if you want to have a little conversation around that later. Winston Williams is from Denmark and he's a mental health professional. Thank you, Julie. So one of the main findings from the study that we've been looking at is the lack of communication skills is one of the main factors that prevents men from seeking treatment and self-disclosing their mental health problems. So what's behind that is sometimes it's difficult to process painful events. It's difficult to process things in a way that is that's helpful. And so what happens is, and we all do this, men and women, by the way, is that we push down those feelings that are painful and uncomfortable. But what happens, you know, if you imagine a beach ball and it bounces on the water and you have to press it hard, and that's full of feelings, and you're pushing it underneath the water with all your feelings in there, and you can hold it down for so long, but the minute you take your hands off it, it's likely to pop back up again. So think of that as your feelings. When you're feeling uncomfortable and you feel hurt, you feel upset, you feel stressed, and you feel that things are not going in the way that you thought they would, and you kind of, right, I'm going to push those feelings to the side for today, get on with what I've got to do, which, you know, we have to do some of that as well. But when we do that too often and we don't acknowledge the feeling, it just comes back with a vengeance. It comes back and it lets you know whether that's emotional or physical. So some physical pain is often connected to an unresolved emotion. So for example, the work that I do around workplace mental health, we look at sickness levels and what people phone in sick with. And often that is back pain, abdominal pain, headaches, nausea and vomiting. Now, all of those are definitely physical. However, with the right questions and the right training for people to ask the right question, we can ascertain actually what is really going on for that individual, for that person. But back pain is definitely one where people then disclose or they go and get treatment. There's nothing wrong with their back, but then when they begin to share a bit about what's going on for them emotionally, pain starts to disappear. So it's really important, and never underestimate the power of your body and your mind and how connected they are. Thank you, Julie. So Alan Seville, he's somebody who runs a charity called Ian's Chain. Again, I'm going to talk about suicide here, whose son ended his life by suicide, and him and his wife set up a charity called in memory of him called Ian's Chain. And they're the only charity in the UK that actually do support families where they've had a loss by suicide. So in his podcast, he said that men still haven't grasped that they need to talk. We, as in he's grouping himself in there as well, still don't talk. And this internalized behavior destroys us. And I think what he meant by that was holding on to your feelings. And you may have heard this expression before. It can really eat you up, and it makes you feel, it makes you feel miserable. It makes you feel really unhappy. And it's a very physical feeling as an emotional feeling as well. Thank you, Julie. So this is Krish Patel. He again was another, I think he played football for, let me think. I want to say Oldham Athletic, if that means anything to anybody, I don't know. It's difficult as a guy. We're the opposite of a lot of women that I know who will share too much, which maybe is true. We will share the opposite, which is zero. So again, this communication is something that is really coming through as a theme in the podcasts. Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to move on to some coping strategies now. So you've kind of built up a little bit of a picture of of some of the challenges that men face in being a man in the world today. So these are some of the coping strategies that have helped some of the people that have been guests on the podcast. Sport. For men, there is a lot of research now identifying that sport and just moving your body really helps your mental health and well-being. Some of those things might be jogging, swimming, cycling, walking, but also things like gardening, fishing, dancing if you're into dancing. And these have proved to reduce anxiety and depression. The reason why that is, I don't know if anybody has a desk job where they sit at their laptop for maybe all day and they just work away, and when at some point in the day you might feel your energy dip, so you feel tired, you feel lethargic. But when you get up and just walk around, move your body, you are reinvigorating the energy. Also with these things, what you are doing is you are hopefully creating a healthy routine. So maybe before or after work, you might do something really simple, like choose to make a commitment to getting up three mornings a week a little bit earlier and going for a walk or going for a swim or a run or a jog, whatever it is. You choose the thing that brings you joy, that makes you happy. And even on the days when it's really difficult to actually muster up that strength, because when you're feeling low and when you're feeling depressed, it does feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders. It's doing something smaller than that. It could be that day that you maybe clean your teeth and have a wash. It may be that you put some fresh clothes on. It may be that you eat something that you really fancy eating. You know, never underestimate that when our mood is really low, doing some of these things is very, very difficult. But so it's the smaller things, but actually to that person, they will be a major achievement. Thanks, Julie. So again, to boost your mental health, focus on eating. Our diet is so important to our mental health and well-being. You know, it's about choosing healthy options when you can and when you feel like it. There's nothing wrong with cake. There's nothing wrong with eating, you know, sweet things and treat things. But please, what I would ask you to do is a little experiment for yourselves is notice your mood with the food that you eat. Notice it, how you feel. Do you feel full? Do you feel sluggish after it? Do you feel like you've got a headache? Do you feel a bit lethargic? Do you feel bloated on some foods? When other foods, you may feel that you have got energy, that you feel fresh, you feel that you have much more enthusiasm for doing things. You know, you're not getting headaches anymore. So it's really interesting how the food that we eat really does impact our mood. So food that's rich in omega-3s, so fatty acids such as salmon, dark leaf green vegetables are good for our brains, and particularly as we mature in life, we need as much protection for our brains as possible. Nuts, seeds and beans are excellent brain food, so it's always worth bearing in mind. This is a really important one. So earlier on in the presentation, it kind of highlighted that perhaps, you know, that some men just don't feel ready to go and speak to their GP. Men don't like the word therapy, and I totally understand why. But if you can find that one person you can be yourself with, it's almost like being able to just to share everything with that one confidant, and that can be anybody that you trust implicitly with those details, because not actually everyone is entitled to hear about your story, your problems and what's going on for you. But if you can think of and have a good relationship where you could just got that one person that you feel totally comfortable in sharing things with, that is going to really help you take some pressure off and be able to process some of the things that you might be experiencing and feeling. Thanks, Julie. Taking regular breaks from work. This is really important. You know, through the pandemic, so many people were working flat out, not taking any breaks. You know, there was so much pressure on people to perform, go above and beyond, because they were fearing losing their jobs. They were fearing that they were going to be in the next wave of redundancies. So that led to a lot of people experiencing burnout. So taking those regular breaks from work in order to prevent burnout is really important. So burnout is a state of emotional, physical and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. Everybody, we all need stress. A little bit of stress in our life motivates us. It gets us up in the morning, it helps us be productive, it perhaps helps us meet targets. However, it's when that stress starts to build and build and build and build, and again, we might be ignoring some of the physical signs, but also then it begins to have an impact on our mental health and our emotional health as well. So I experienced burnout. I've been that person where I had to take 6 months off work because there was nothing left in the tank for me. I was filling everybody else's cup up, but I certainly wasn't filling my own up. So I've learned the hard way, and that is one of the reasons why I do what I do today, because it's really important to help people see when they're heading in that direction. And what we want to do is to prevent burnout, keep people in work for as long as we possibly can, but making sure they're getting the right support around them. In your spare time, do something that you are good at or learn something new. Try to leave your comfort zone. So I do quite like learning new things. I would never learn it to perfection, because I think when we try and do things to perfection, that can also really have an impact on us. It goes back to that being, does that equal success? And not all of the time. But what are you good at that you enjoy doing that you don't do anymore for a particular reason? Because often what happens is we stop doing things that are good for us when we feel stressed, or when we feel we have got other things that are taking over, or we've got to prioritize our life for different reasons. So perhaps that's something to kind of go back to and think, what is it that I really enjoy doing and that I'm good at, and it brings me joy, and do more of those things. Thanks, Julie. So looking out for your mates. This can be mates in or out of the workplace. So looking for changes in their behaviour. When you work closely with people, you will get to know their behaviour patterns. Even if you're not consciously aware of it, you will notice things like mood. Someone's mood changing. Someone's maybe kind of withdrawing a little bit. They might be a little bit more irritable. It may be that you've noticed that there's episodes of lateness creeping in that were never there before. Or if you're a manager, looking at someone's productivity and the quality of their work. So when these things begin to change, so these are behaviour changes, that is going to let you know that perhaps something is going on for that person that they're not telling you. It can be at home, but it also can equally be in work as well. So it's not what they say, because people can tell us anything really. It's what they do. So it goes back to that saying of actions speak louder than words. And they really do, because, we communicate non-verbally. I think it's 95% of the time. So our non-verbal communications tell us more about someone else than what they are saying. So that's always worth kind of keeping that under your hat. Thank you, Julie. It's important that you let them know you're here, so that you're there to support and listen to them without being judgmental. I think it's really difficult sometimes not to be judgmental, if I'm truthful. I think we all have preconceived ideas about other people, or perhaps how other people, may choose to live their life. But when we listen to someone that's experienced a lot of emotional pain, it's about demonstrating that judgment isn't there. So it's really about just using your listening skills and listening to what that person's telling you. And sometimes they don't want you to say anything. What they want is you just to be there, for you to listen to them. Or even if they sit in silence, they're still telling you something. But it's about being able to create that safe space and to hold that space for them if they're really struggling with something emotionally. Thanks, Julie. Someone who is experiencing mental health problems may find it hard to keep in touch. Now, I think this is a really, really important one, because often when someone is struggling with their mental health, the last thing that they will do is reach out. And you see a lot of posters and media saying, oh, reach out when you need help. Actually, asking for help when you're unwell, or when you're not feeling confident about yourself, or when you've got lots of different thoughts that aren't helpful going on in your mind, is the hardest thing that you can do. So I always encourage the people that are around that person, reach into them, encourage them, offer them support, perhaps send them a text. Don't often expect a reply at all. If you get one, then great. If you don't, don't kind of think, oh, I sent them a message and they didn't reply back to me. It's probably because they can't, or they just haven't got the energy to reply, or they're just not ready to have a conversation. Voice notes. So I don't know if anybody uses WhatsApp, leaving a voice note on WhatsApp, just saying, hey, haven't seen you around for a few days. I hope everything's all right. I'll check in with you again in a couple of days' time. There's no need to give me a message, but if you want to just say, hi, I'm here for you. Really simple voice note like that. It allows the other person to know that somebody's thinking of them. You've given them permission to make contact if they want to, and or if they don't. These can make such a big difference, but yet they're such simple kind of ways of looking out for your mate. Thanks, Julie. Normalize their feelings and explain it's okay not to be okay. And sometimes, you know, sometimes it is okay not to be okay. It's just, you will be okay when you're ready to be. And you might want to encourage them or make some suggestions or signposting them to seek professional help. Thanks, Julie. Giving a support to a friend sometimes can be rewarding, which it can be, but it can also be very draining. So it can take its toll on you as well, particularly if you are someone that really is likes to kind of make sure everybody's good and okay, but you neglect yourself a little bit. So it's about how do you take care of your own mental health as well. And that might be just about some boundary setting, saying I'm available between 10 and 12 or 6 and 7 p.m. It'd be great to hear from you, because you've got to be able to recharge yourself as well, because life is very, very demanding. Thank you, Julie. And that's self-care. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you really can't. And trust me, from my experience, I couldn't pour from my empty cup because there was nothing to give. Thanks, Julie. So here's some resources. Now, some of these resources are global as well. There's a text service called Shout. So if you don't like having that phone conversation with somebody, it's 24/7 confidential. And all you do is you text Shout 85258, and you have a text conversation with the person on the other end of the line, rather than having to talk to them. Next, thank you, Julie. National Suicide Prevention Helpline offers support listening service. So they would never give advice, but they just listen to the person and what they're experiencing. And that's a national number, which is on there. And again, that's open 24/7. Next one, please. Thank you. So this is for men only. This is called the campaign. It's called CALM, and it's a campaign against living miserably. If you think back to the beginning of the presentation, you know that men feel very low in their lifestyle, and they feel that they don't always have the best quality of life. This is why CALM was kind of formed, really. And you can call them, and it's 5 p.m. till midnight every day. And again, it's for people, if you prefer not to speak on the phone, you could try the Calm app. There's an app as well. Thank you, Julie. There's some information here for gay, bisexual or transgender switchboard. And again, you know, that's very specifically the people are trained in this area, and they will be discreet and confidential to your requirements and needs. Thanks, Julie. And the other one that I would say, which you may already have heard of, is the Samaritans. Again, an excellent listening service, which is non-judgmental and no advice. So some of the services that we offer at Working With You in Mind, so we help organisations look at the mental health reputation, and that is about helping them with their psychological safety and delivering and helping them create really good mental health strategies by delivering workplace mental health knowledge for managers and leaders, because it has to start with the top. And then once the managers and the leaders have really got good, healthy mental health, then usually you find what happens is it follows down into the rest of the organisation. Men's mental health workshops, a little bit more detail than what we've gone into on our session today. And we also offer coaching and mentoring directly to people in the workplace. And that's it for the presentation today. But if there's any questions, please feel free.
Thank you, Jo. That was a really interesting presentation. I'm just having a look at the questions now.
Okay.
So someone's just making a comment, so be interested in your views on this one. Peer pressure is one of the causes of depression and anxiety.
Yes, it can be, particularly I think with younger people. It's not exclusive to young people though, but I think now particularly with the way that social media is set up and the accessibility to you know, perhaps this false sense of security that people are living a lifestyle that's probably not real online compared to what it's like in reality. I think that that pressure is very, very harmful for particularly the young age group, but that doesn't exclude, you know, the older age group either, because we all do a compare and despair, i.e. comparing what our lives and where we're at now, thinking about the men's age group 40 to 49. They may think, well, I'm not where I wanted to be in that age group. So does it cause anxiety and depression? It may cause some anxiety, but often with depression, it is more related to a chemical imbalance in our brains. So it will be a contributing factor rather than a cause in itself. But definitely, it may make people feel anxious. Just hope that helps.
Thank you, Jo. Daryl, do you have any questions?
That was very interesting, Joe. And every 40 seconds is kind of sticking with me. It's that's frightening.
It's very frightening. Yeah, it
One
is.
way of opening a webinar, I'm sure. But as a HSE professional, and sure a lot of our people that are attending today are involved in the HSE field. Is there a way of doing risk assessment or a particular way of doing risk assessment around this area? And two, what sort of training? I know you mentioned it from your company there. What sort of training should a HSE professional get if that's something that he's aware of or she is aware of in their company?
Okay, really good questions, those, Daryl. So thanks for asking those. I think in terms of the risk assessment, I think it's about, you know, what I'm experiencing in the work that I do, that risk assessments aren't being offered. So therefore, decisions are being made based on not knowing what the risks are to that individual. So I think it's about really being clear and highlighting that risk assessments are an essential part of someone's care in the workplace. And I think it's about working with the individual who's perhaps having the risk assessment done, finding out what it is that they believe that they need at that time, and seeing what can be, you know, where they can be signposted to, or looking at what help and what's available currently within the company or the organisation, or do you need to kind of go elsewhere to get that support? If they need to take time off sick, I think it's about a lot of employees comment that sometimes they feel, you know, they don't want to go off sick, but they know that they're not great at work either, because actually home's not good. So neither place is a safe haven for them. So not being in work, and it's about keeping in contact with that person if they'll let you, you know, making sure that they've perhaps had a visit, a daily conversation with someone, or they've been in contact with somebody from the workplace, just checking in on them and just making sure that they still feel that value, even though perhaps they're not able to be at work. Does that help?
Yeah. It helps. I suppose I'm always a little bit cautious about with my team about getting involved in this, because we're not social workers, we're not trained as psychologists. And I always get a little bit nervous that they're going to take on too much.
Yeah, of course.
If the person decides to open up to them. Any
Yeah.
advice on that?
Yeah, well, I guess that's probably where the next answer to the next question would be. It's, yeah, so some of the training that we do is around communication skills, because communication is so important when working with someone and dealing with people's mental health and well-being. And it's about how to ask those difficult questions, you know, thinking about empathy and compassion and not having the judgment. So that's, I think feeling equipped and skilled enough to ask the questions is definitely an important factor. It's about knowing that you don't have, you're not fully responsible for that person, because that person has to take responsibility for their own mental health and well-being, and the company also does what it can as well. But it's about looking at that governance structure and what's in place to support internally, but also what's going on outside as well. So have they been referred to occupational health, for example, or if you have staff counselling or what's it called, an employee assistance program, are those things available and are they accessible to that person? So that, I think those things are really important, but it's about understanding really how best to communicate the support and listen and use the empathy, the skills of empathy and compassion with people that are really struggling with their mental health. And then the other thing that we look at is we help companies to implement wellness action plans, and that belongs to the employee, but it's designed with their line manager. So if they do feel unwell at work, or there is particularly a lot of stress, or they've got things going on at home, they have it documented in an action plan, and they can come to kind of mutual agreements of what the employee's responsibilities are, and then what perhaps the line manager is going to do, or someone else to support them. So it's about not shying away too much from risk, but it's about knowing what the risks are.
Mm.
And it's a very tricky, delicate area, I know.
It's a tough area, and it's something I think we need to be, as you said there, that men kind of suffer by themselves in one sense, and they don't always have that confidence or to find that person to be the shoulder to lean on or whatever.
Yeah.
That's because we're brought up that way, and it's big boys don't cry.
All of those things, yeah, absolutely.
All of these things. But I just wanted to say one last thing here, because I know that Judy is under pressure. You mentioned about exercise and sports there.
Yeah.
And just from personal escape, if you like, I play soccer every Saturday up in one of the compounds, and for the 2 hours out on the pitch and just playing football and just focusing on the game, I switch off for everything else. Nothing else in there. And I think you said it there in your delivery, is that it's that release. That release it makes you feel a little bit taller, a little bit stronger, a bit better about yourself as well.
It does. It does. And I think that's great that you do that, and I hope other people are able to find, a release from sport or things that they enjoy doing. Whether it's, it can be things. People, I've been surprised at how many people actually really enjoy fishing, because it's very calming, it's very therapeutic. They've got to focus on the fish. But yeah, I think it is. So it's like in a form of escapism, really. But you're focusing on the game. If you're part of a team, you don't want to let your teammates down. So you've got that camaraderie there. You're all going for the same thing, which is a goal, or for the other team not to get a goal. So it just allows you to kind of get absorbed into that time. And what you'll find is that you are also releasing all your feel good hormones as well. So your oxytocin, your serotonin in your brain, they all start to your brain gets flushed with those things. So you will feel so much better.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was really excellent.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I'm going to hand back over to Julie there, because I know she's under pressure. Sorry, Julie.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone.
No, thank you, Joe. That was a really interesting presentation. Personally, I like walking at lunchtime, listening to music. So that's my kind of escape from sitting at a computer all day. I could listen to you all day, actually.
So thank you.
Technical issues you've had today joining the meeting, and thank you again for volunteering, especially at short notice. And thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you
for attending this evening. And as usual, the recording will be uploaded onto the RRSM YouTube channel, and the CPD certificates will be sent out tomorrow. So I'd like to wish everyone a good afternoon or good evening, and I hope to see you at the next meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much, Daryl.